writing a book about a novel about the sons, two sons, one of a politician, I suppose inevitably corrupt, and the other one, the brother.
I think it's everybody's legacy, John. Belongs to all of us. We don't realize it sometimes, especially those of us who live in cities. We think land is someone else's problem, someone else's issue. But I think it's everybody's. The legacy is everybody's. It belongs to everybody, and so we are all responsible.
Shoma?
I actually disagree with that, so the disagreements have begun.
Oh, great.
The land that we want actually belongs to the people. The current development paradigm belongs to the state. And the people, of course, there's no question of who the legacy, the people are of their own, but the land certainly belongs to the people, and I think, unfortunately, the development model we are following doesn't recognize that.
I agree with Tarun actually. It's everybody's legacy in the sense that while the land does belong to the people, but once you require it for urbanization or industrialization, which is so much required for the growth of the nation or the economy of the nation, I think then it becomes everybody's responsibility. The industry, which is many times painted as a villain, they have to ensure that the compensation or the development of the people takes well, and the state to ensure that things also are done well for the people.
And Neelima?
I think that land is a legacy of a country. It's a legacy of India. I think the legacy is also the problems, the way we are debating them, the reforms which are required. I think all this is part of the legacy, and that legacy, I think, belongs to India at this moment when it's positioning itself.
Great, thank you. We're going to split the talk, in the conversation into three sections. We're going to start off by talking about land for industry development, which will include inevitably the land bill now in Parliament. We're then going to discuss land and corruption, and then the social impact of the change in land use. And we're going to start off, Hemant, with you leading in on the issue of a plan for new development and how you cope with it. Your company, of course, is huge. You're one of the biggest steel makers in the world, but you've had problems in getting sites for new development, like the one at Kalinganagar in Orissa, where sadly 12 people were killed in a demonstration against land use in 2006, and you're having problems in Chhattisgarh getting land there. So along with the successes, you have these problems and you face them, and therefore you can tell us how to face up to these issues and what the answers could be.
I'll have to give you a little background of the Kalinganagar.
In just 3 minutes, please.
In a few minutes, yes.
3 minutes.
Okay. Look, we have a steel plant at Jamshedpur over 100 years, and a society and a plant, and so is in the mines and collieries, and where we have done community development even before we started the steel plant or the mines. So that was not the issue, and what we thought here was that people already know it, and that was a mistake we made on our part. After that unfortunate shooting incidents, and that's not really relevant today, what we did was to actually go and communicate with the people. Unfortunate part is, most of us, as Tarun rightly said, are from the urban background. We don't understand the local feelings, we don't understand the local language. Fortunately for us, we had people who actually can speak that language. And I'm sure most of the people here also do not know the language, what the tribals in that area speak. It's a language called Ho. So we had fortunately these couples who went, but they were so convinced about our company that they actually took that challenge. Their lives were not so safe because the emotions were running high at that time. Yet they volunteered to go, spend time, explain the position, and then gradually the situation improved. Today we are operating as if it's a normal situation. 2-3 lessons, quick lessons. One is communication. Second is the stakeholders who are affected have actually been cheated sometime or the other in the past, and you need to accept it. The third is there is a change from the agrarian to an industrial society, which everybody is not mentally prepared for. And fourth, most important, is the role of the women. Actually, the women have a very strong role in that society when they are in the agricultural roles. But when they become industrial, there is a complete difference in the role. And how do you recognize that? How do you make them comfortable is another dimension. So there were these 4 or 5 issues on which we started working, and the situation has certainly changed. I am not saying that things have become like Jamshedpur or our mines area, which are now stable. We have a long way to go, because now comes the social dimension, the education, employability, health. But good thing is, thanks to the progress of IT, we have the data which shows us what is the, and we have taken pains to collect it, because such things doesn't exist, which is what is their physical health, financial conditions, educational standards, and current income levels. And what we want to do is that every 3 years have a social audit, because it can't be just our data, have a social audit of eminent people and see that on these 4 or 5 dimensions, what is the change we have achieved. Hopefully positive, but that's what we want to do.
And how have you applied that at Chhattisgarh?
Sorry?
In Chhattisgarh, how have you applied that?
No, Chhattisgarh we are still waiting. We have not even gone on the ground, because I think the law and order situation right now is still not conducive to get into it.
But if you were starting with a new site now, how would you apply it, what you've learned? So now you've got a new site somewhere else.
No.
Elsewhere in Orissa, where you've got a bit of a bad reputation coming good, how would you apply what you've learned?
We are actually doing that in a place called Haveri in Karnataka. And what we did was, learning from this experience, is first go there, explain to people what we do. And we took farmers in the batches of 50 each, 4 batches, to Jamshedpur, where our steel plant is, to the mines area where our mines operate, showed them what we are doing, and actually left them on their own to go and mix with the people whom they chose. It was not sort of a guided tour to that extent. We certainly took them to the place, and then they were left 1 or 2 evenings on their own, just to interact with the people. Once that happened, they really willingly want to do things for us.
So Shoma, Tata Steel, a goodie or a baddie?
John, you're trying to get me into a TV debate. This is a literary discussion.
I'm just trying to make the moderator say very few words.
Actually, John, actually Tata is a great example of what's going wrong with the development model in India, because they're really the blue chip as far as community development and at least an ethos that speaks of public conscience goes. But the fact that so many Tata projects have people's movements against them is a wake-up call for why this entire land acquisition process in India is in jeopardy and why so many people are opposed to it. Mr. Nerurkar started by saying that land belongs to everybody, and it's, when you know that you need to industrialize, then people can't really resist that. I really disagree with that premise. John asked me to speak about corruptions, incidents of corruption in land acquisition, and I could tell you endless numbers of those.
Can we stay on this issue and come to corruption in a second stage?
Just on the Tata Steel?
Yeah, no, you can move off Tata Steel and you can talk about what you think about what they're trying to apply.
No, John, to make it specific would really, well, if you want to know about what I think is wrong with the Tata enterprise in Chhattisgarh, is again a classic structural issue of what is wrong with all land acquisition projects, which is that they do not believe in consent and consultation. In Chhattisgarh, when the people's consultation was invited, pretty much really legitimate people were kept out of that assembly. There was a police escort. Nobody who really wanted to resist was really allowed into that assembly. Now, I don't really want to personalize this, because in my book, Tata for me is an example of what can go wrong when we try to speed up things, particularly in a very complex democracy like us. When you want to speed up something to a point where you want convenience over correctness, then that is when all the problems arise. I think these are huge structural problems. The corruption is endemic in the acquisition process right now, and if Tata Steel is the blue chip and is victim of that, you can imagine just how badly it cascades down the line.
Okay. Tarun, agricultural land for industry, do we need it?
I think we need to take the conversation beyond Tatas.
Yeah, indeed. No, I've moved on.
For me, I think Tata Group generally and Tata Steel are quote-unquote a role model. but that doesn't apply to all of industry. And here, I would be very much with, Shoma's concern. Are you consulting the people? Are you taking into account their interests and their agendas? How are you dealing with the whole acquisition process? How are you compensating? Now, I want to take you into a different world. If you are not insistent on having a plant or a factory near a raw material source, as is the case with steel, but many other industries, you could be anywhere in India, Today, in the country, the defense establishment has 18 lakh acres of land. 18 lakh acres of land are with the defense forces. Why? The railways have 1 lakh acres of land. The public sector enterprises and the sick and closed enterprises of this country have huge land unutilized. And by the way, if you want to talk about Bombay, the Bombay Port Trust in Bombay has 1,800 acres of land. The point I'm making is that you can set up a lot of industry if you negotiate, if you reach out, and we get the defense forces and the railways to give up a small bit of their land which is under their management, which is not being farmed. There's no agriculture there. Why are we not doing that? So I think business needs to look at its requirements of land differently and reach out to different target audiences to get their land, not only look at agricultural land. I want to change the debate from agriculture, from farming, because we also need food. We need food production. We need agricultural self-sufficiency. We are not doing enough there. We need to put more technology there. We need more food production for the future, etc., etc. So why are we only looking at farmland? We need to look at other land which is available.
Tarun, why didn't you make that CII policy when you were running the CII?
Well, when I left CII, which is nearly 9 years ago, John, this land issue was not there. Really, it wasn't on the agenda 9 years ago.
Land wasn't on the agenda?
It was not the way it's been the last few years.
And why is that?
I don't know. It was just not there as a big issue. At that point of time.
Why is it now?
It is now because I think many companies, many corporates have not handled it right, to put it mildly. And I think that I'm completely with Shoma on this, that you need to handle this whole issue much more sensitively, show much more respect to the people and to the farmer who owns the land. And I would frankly prefer, by and large, government acquisition. With all its faults that government has, I think there is much more public scrutiny of government, and I would therefore prefer to have a land management and development authority independent as far as possible of the system, and we've now seen there are statutory bodies which can be independent given appropriate leadership.
Shoma was anxious to answer that question when I asked you, and I did say before we came in that Tarun Das was going to put Shoma out of a job on the platform by being almost more radical, which we didn't expect. But what you're just a second longer. But what you're actually saying, Tarun, is that in the last 6 or 7 years since you retired as the director,
it's become a big issue. No.
It's become a big issue because companies are doing corporate cronyism and all the rest has increased, or because it's gone into new areas like mining, or what?
No,
why wasn't it an issue on your table when you were heading the CII, and why is it now?
I think definitely mining is a much larger issue which has come up in the last few years, and clearly all that we see in the media, and we believe a lot of what is in the media, the companies have been irresponsible in dealing with the land issue. That's the way I would see it. So there are exceptions to that rule, maybe a Tata Steel or someone else, but by and large I think we have to look at the corporate sector with concern.
Shoma.
Yeah, John, there's so many issues we're skirting over. For one, if you ask me about the legacy of CII, it's great to hear Tarun speaking like this now, but I really wonder, clearly that thinking was not embedded in CII, because CII and FICCI both are resisting even whatever marginal liberal kind of re-examination that the government is trying to do of the Land Acquisition Act, and I'll come to that. But the question you just asked about why suddenly people's movements and resistances on the ground speeded up as they have done, and that is absolutely because of the bad planning of government, and because we have come to a crazy sort of panic-ridden idea about industrial development. The government goes to industry almost as if it's begging in a Salvation Army soup line, you know, for the largesse of industry. I really don't understand why that needs to happen. We are a wonderful, robust economy. Industry stands to make huge amounts of money from everything that they set up. It can be done in equal terms. The reason why all of this has happened is because in around 2005-2006, the SEZ Act was passed, which was completely nullified in its thinking and in its execution. But both houses of parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, passed it across parties, no debate. In the first sitting of the SEZ committee, they cleared 337 SEZ projects in about 2 hours. China has 6 SEZ projects. Now that is the kind of speed at which we are trying to undertake industrialization. The other point which Tarun said very, very importantly right now is that we need agriculture and industry to go together. Even if you speak to, going with the theme of Tata's, you know, and as I've said earlier, I really don't want this to be a discussion about them, but it's wonderful because in a way they're symptomatic. Tata's project in Singur was a wonderful example of why things were going wrong. There was at that point a Land Acquisition Act that was completely bad in law, a colonial act that did not consider consultation, consent, fair pricing, compensation. There was no relief, no rehabilitation bill, and yet both governments and industry were willing to undertake taking over of land under the aegis of these laws. Now why on earth will people not resist that? The other point is that there are 50,000 factories, going with the same argument that there are 50,000 fallow factories in Bengal. People were asking Tata Motors, why is it that you want Singur, which is 3-crop land, golden, filled with water, 45 kilometers from Calcutta? What possibly can we gain from being an agro society, being transferred into a manufacturing society, where most of us will be displaced from land in which we have lived for centuries, when there are many other fallow places where Tata Motors will be welcomed, because these are fallow land not being utilized. Now those answers were not forthcoming, which is why, whether it was politicized or not, you know, that's the other thing that we do. We hide behind the idea always that there's some political hand. But you try making people excited and willing to put their lives on the line for something that they don't actively feel about, you know. Politics may magnify it, but the sense of unrest is there. The number 2 point, John, just if I may finish this point, is that when you take over a company or a corporate, you know, there's a takeover of a corporate company, are you able to take over the company until you have finished the transactions with that company? Sorry, because you're here, Mr. Nerurkar, when Tata takes over Jaguar, doesn't everybody get off the table feeling that it's a good deal?
The subject. Can I bring...
So, John, just to finish the point, that everybody has to feel that it's a sweet deal. Right now, one half of this deal, all land deals, one half of the people feel that they're not getting a fair deal, and that is at the heart of it.
I'm bringing you in. And the answer on Tata Motors at Singur is because somebody at the top of Tata's wanted that site because it was on the main road and would be visible and would be a great symbol of success. It should have gone somewhere else. It didn't. It was a bad decision. And I'm just saying that. I'm misbehaving as a moderator. I'm not going to allow any debate on that point. Neelima, sorry, we've left you out so far, and I'm going to give you the microphone. The land bill, how much is that going to address some of these questions we've been talking about?
I'd like to refer to a line which the National Advisory Council had said in their recommendations for the land bill, that the people who are affected by the project should benefit as much from the project as the people who are doing the project, who are undertaking the project. I think that actually is at the core of all relief, rehabilitation negotiations. I think the focus should also be on consent and consultation, not just relief and rehabilitation on paper. I think that's what the land bill is trying to do. And I must say that there's a lot of industry protest against issues like social assessment and how are we going to ever get this done in the given time. Every project is going to get delayed. And I also understand what you were asking earlier, that why is there so much why is it so much in news? Because I think we are a country in a hurry. We want everything. We are competing with China. We are competing with every other growing economy. We want everything fast. I don't just mean the urban industry thing. Just 20 days back, I was in a village in Yavatmal district of Vidarbha. And the question of the farmers was that we don't get enough to live on from 3 acres of land, which is what 3 acres is a marginal farmer. That's about 60% of farmers in India are marginal. So they say that give us options. We don't mind, selling our land if that's what it takes, but give us options. So either we are going to be stuck with issues which are not totally elaborately discussed, or that's what the land bill is trying to do, I think, partially, which is to give a structure where the farmers like those who want an option will get to put their point across if they want to sell their land. And if they don't want to, even then they have a mechanism to go through. Now, I have my doubts. As a journalist, I have my doubts whether the government can actually implement the bill. We have great bills. We have brilliant lawmakers in this country. But how much of it does get translated? And that's something to be seen, I think.
Just wanted to make 2 points. Number one is, one answer to your question why there was a sudden issue on the land. I think the Indian economy, apart from the SEZ issue, which I agree, the Indian economy also grew very fast. So there was a tearing hurry to grow, like what we are talking about China. And the second thing is that the mining issue, which was briefly touched, the mining suddenly became very, very important and very economical compared to what it was. And mining is not really only agriculture, it's forest, it's tribals, it's displacement. And I must mention that both SEZ and mining have not been done in a responsible manner by, let's say, most of the companies. And that's the reason we have such anger against both at this stage, which is a fact, and we must face those facts.
How practical is Tarun's idea that defence and railway and other land should be used for big projects? Could you imagine, maybe difficult for a steelworks?
Quite frankly, I do not know which part of the land is available, but it actually depends on the industry. For example, it doesn't make sense to put up a steel plant somewhere in the middle of the country if the iron ore is in another corner, because you just waste money, which is also a national wastage in terms of transportation. So that's not really the issue. If there is a land available and somewhere near where it makes sense, and it will be available, I am sure. After all, the figures he has reeled out, there is so much of land, I am sure it is available. And the second point which was made about the people wanting to give land and then they are not sure whether they are going to get fair compensation, or if they give up the land, is the money going to go to them? The social impact analysis, is it going to be done properly? Because there are examples globally. And we must learn from. It is not that the first time a country is acquiring land as becoming industrialized. You have plenty of examples world over where people have acquired land. There are lessons to be learned from it, especially in this social impact environmental analysis. We have experience in Thailand, which is not so good.
Shoma, let's move on to corruption, which is the second thing. I realize we're beginning to run out of time. The country's been awash with land, mining, SEZ, corruption. You accused us just now of skating over things. I wondered if I could tempt you not to skate over and to tell us why you think that whatever that figure was, 337 SEZs were approved in one ministerial sitting. If you don't want to expect to be more precise on that, that's fine, but it leads us into corruption.
No, John, I'd love to be specific about that. The point I was making is that the reason why SEZs were passed, and I'm not going to speculate about kickbacks on which I don't have factual information because I think that's a pointless exercise. I think there's a much larger issue, on corruption. It's pointless to look at the incidental ones because on all of it, there is corruption. Any of us who buy a house, do any deal in land, we know that there's corruption, and that's not the issue. The issue really is about policy. It's about bad, myopic thinking, and that is to do with mining. Let me give you a small idea of what's gone wrong with mining. Let's just put aside the land issue for one moment. All these years, the government was just getting about 12 rupees for a ton of iron ore that was being mined in India, and that could sell at the London Metal Exchange for rupees 5,000, So that's the kind of absolutely bad, disproportionate kind of policies under which all of this is happening. Take power projects. I've also already mentioned that at the heart of it, the corruption arises out of three things. One is consent, the other is fair pricing, and the third is rehabilitation. If these three things are not taken into account in any business deal, in any transaction, it is in essence corrupt. If you are told today that you must get out of your Joybag house or your Nariman Point house because industry must grow there and that is good for the GDP, and your children must be displaced from whatever school they're going to, you've lived there for centuries, all your friends are in the neighborhood, but you must jettison all of that because we have this idea of eminent domain, then will you do it or will you not? You will certainly not do it. You will not get out of your Nariman Point, what are they called?
High-rise.
High-rise, I'm forgetting the word, where you have the
Skyscrapers.
where you have the sea as a vista, So let's not have double standards of what urban people will do and what rural people will do. Number 2 point is that Chidambaram, in an interview with me, once told me that the vision of the government is to bring 85% of India out of rural India into the urban centers. Now again, this is a problem in policy. Do we have urban centers that are welcoming people that are being driven off the land? You're driving people off the land, but you're not creating any infrastructure. You don't have worker colonies. In Gurgaon, have you seen any worker colonies? Have you seen public transport? If you're not going to have reasonable policy making, there is going to be unrest and there is going to be corruption. The other point is that in almost all the SEZ acts, in almost all the SEZ projects, I did not hear one industrial voice which said, wait a minute, what is wrong with this act? We are being allowed to take over huge thousands of acres of land, but this act stipulates that only 30% of that has to be used for the manufacturing that I have said it's going to be used for. 70% of that real estate can be used for other things. What is it? It's a real estate scam. After that, you don't pay people. Right now in the Narmada Bachao Andolan, you had people standing in water for 15 to 18 days because 20 years ago the land was taken and they still have not been compensated. The point I really want to make is that until policy calms down, until we realize that industry is a very welcome part of our national life, but it is not something that we are begging for, that there are people who are sort of being magnanimous by investing in any state, I don't think that any of this policy making will become calm. The final point I'd like to make, John, is that even over power, mining is just bad in law. The way it is mined, we're finishing all our mining, we're finishing all our mines and our resources. In Bellary, which is a great example, resources that should have lasted this country 30 years has been used up in 6 years. Almost all of it went to China. China, being the clever country it is sourcing its iron ore from us rather than using its own, and that is what most countries do. Ashok Chawla, who put out this huge committee report on the use of natural resources, was telling me that India does not even have a map of its resources. So you don't know how much of it should be mined, in what time frame it should be mined, how much industry should be allowed to mine. So that's where mining is concerned. Now let me come to the issue of power. Just one last point, John. Half a minute. The issue of power. We are always being panicked about how much power and energy this country needs, how much energy security we need and we don't have. And so there is a blitzkrieg of power projects that are being unleashed in the country, and the new Land Acquisition Act that is being, that has been passed by the cabinet but has to come into Parliament, whatever advantages it has achieved does not pertain to the SEZ Act, to the Mining Act, to the Power and Energy and Infrastructure Act. So in effect, all big projects were being left out of the purview of it. Now, power projects in Srikakulam, you have 22, John, last sentence, 22 power plants coming up in a span of about 7 kilometers. People on the ground are again and again saying, have a multifarious approach to development in this country. We are a multifarious society. Of course we need big power projects, but you also need small power projects, local power projects. And that's when you will not have this kind of excess and you will not have this kind of people's anger.
Neelima, can you pick up some of that? I mean, the 85% of rural populations moving to urban areas sounds crazy. A total lack of planning, no urban planning for where they're going. The Bombay, Delhi corridor, where they're going to build mega cities which will probably be an awful mess. There's no water, there's no pre-planning of what's needed there. Talk to us about the problems of planning and of land use and of the change in communities, what impact it has on communities.
I'd like to say that where is our best urban model of living? I mean, which is our best city? You know, the best cities of our country like Delhi or Bombay are lessons to be still learned, I believe. And I agree with Shoma that there is a sense of alienation of these people when they move to the urban centers. There is still an element of anger which we see manifest in many different ways in social problems and crime. So I don't think that, you know, moving to the cities in this kind of scenario is a solution for the rural people. But I do believe that when there is a land acquisition taking place, especially by private players, that the people should be trained, they should be imparted skills which they can then use to have better options where they are. But I must also say that my ground, information, or at least the little bit of traveling I have done, shows me that people do not want to live in the villages, which are lightless, which don't have roads. They don't want to suffer the way they have been suffering, the apathy of the political structure, or whatever you call it.
But isn't the answer to do more development, moving away from the cities, not obviously starting in the most remote villages, but to develop rural areas as China did with township industries, rather than going for the big conurbations?
That's exactly the point, that we have, there is a need for urbanization and industrialization, but not at the cost of the farmers, but by their consent. I don't think there are, it's difficult to imagine a village which doesn't have any facilities, any modern facilities, wanting to stay the way they are. They would like to grow, they would like to be more urban, if that's the word, but more developed, but with choices. And I think it's the job of the industry and also the state to give those choices to the farmers.
But then to make sure also that the money that the farmers then get fair value, and that the money that they get is
Absolutely
sourced in a way that they can enjoy it rather than waste it very quickly.
Well, that's personal choice, I think, but the money they get in compensation, on which there has been a big debate on how much they should get, because land rates are very commonly underreported in our country, and we don't have the exact land rate as, you know, on which you can decide the compensation. So there is a big problem of compensation. How much compensation do these farmers get? And usually, if a big industry is good enough, I mean, good to sort of negotiate, they can get away by getting land at very cheap rates.
Tarun, people who drove here on that awful road from Delhi, the highway runs for 30 kilometers, and once you've got past the first 10 kilometers or so, you're in an area which 20 years ago, 15 years ago was farmland. The rapid development has changed social lives, it's totally uprooted families, it's uprooted communities, it's led to social problems, it's led to labour unrest, as we've seen in some of the auto factories, Maruti and others. Haryana is in the news for all the wrong reasons, with what are rightly regarded as anti-social old village views. If you were starting afresh, when you were at the CII, if you were starting afresh with the idea that corridor should be developed from the Delhi airport to Manesar and onwards, what should have been done? Because that I think is a neat little area to look at, which has been so ruins in many ways for economic success and for the growth that's needed.
I think we need to look at a different model of development. I'm just kind of echoing something from out of what Shoma said and what Neelima said. Today, technology enables us to have decentralized, clean energy. It's not just renewable energy. I have come across research done and innovation done for battery technology to store power. And I think that is the solution for villages and semi-urban areas, clusters of villages with clean energy. I have connected these people who are in the US, the research group, with Tata Power in fact, and they are advanced in discussions, and Tata Power is probably going to take this decentralized, using batteries to store power into the villages and rural areas, And so the way of going forward is not only going to be big thermal power stations. Of course, the large steel plants and others will need their own power, but there's a lot of other power that our country needs, our people needs, which it doesn't have to use big power stations, expensive transmission lines, theft of that, all of that. So we've got to go down the innovation way, the technology way, the decentralized way, the clean way, in terms of especially energy, to find solutions for the future now. And let's not worry about the past. We can still correct many things going forward, because so many people and so many people of our country are without electricity today. So we can do a huge service by using new technologies to give them clean energy at their doorstep and not necessarily have to move them to urban centers. We need to transform where they live to better quality. So, Jairam talks about sanitation or whatever. We've got to take these services to them and not, I'm afraid I don't agree with this 85% moving to, the traditional urban areas. I think we have to help to convert new urban areas of a different quality at the rural level.
I'm about to open it up to all of you, so please think of some questions. Hemant, you wanted to say something before
Just
we
wanted
open it up.
to make a point. About this urbanization, I think there is a bit of a misunderstanding. I don't think the finance minister ever wants urbanization or displacement of the people without creating a equivalent infrastructure, which is what exactly has happened in China. When people have been shifted, people have been, first of all, the infrastructure has been built, like when you take over the company, everybody has agreement, you need to do that first, and then only shift people. Secondly, ours is a huge country, and if you have villages all over where you have to take all the facilities, imagine the cost of infrastructure. That is why I think you need more centers, urbanized centers, rather than each village having a standard of living which we dream of. So that's a problem we need to appreciate, understand.
So, Mr. Nerurkar, unfortunately, that I think of you as, one of the better corporate chieftains, and I just want to make this.
Nothing to help us.
No, I do. I mean, Mr. Nerurkar is one of the few who acknowledges they made mistakes, which is a great starting point.
I think that was a slight modification of what you just said, but never mind.
But I just want to make a couple of quick points on this. One is that I really, very often one gets cornered when one speaks to sound as if one is anti-industry. Absolutely not. One is not anti-industry. One is anti the process by which industry is happening. I think industry needs to understand, very often you hear in policy circles and with industrialists of green terrorists. It's as if environmental concerns are something alien, as if corporates are not citizens of the same society, as if their children are not going to need water and clean air and everything else that environmentalists are talking about. So I think to make people, environment, all of that as stakeholders of a corporate enterprise is one important thing. The second thing, Mr. Nerurkar, is again I disagree with you when you say the dreams that we share is not possible to bring to rural India. I agree with Neelima. A lot of people want to leave rural India and they should be enabled to do so. But there are many who would love to live back on the land, who do not enjoy coming to urban centers, but who do not have basic facilities. It is not impossible to create basic facility of health, schooling and electricity in the villages of India. And finally, John, when you look at the construction companies in urban centers, look at the migrant workers there. You're not even able to create a basic prefabricated workers colony on a project that is worth 1,000, 2,000 crores. You can't spend 10 lakhs to create working conditions for them.
Thank you. A question here.
Okay. First, I thank Tarun for giving inside information that we have 18 lakh acre of land right in the hearts of cities of India, where defense people are sitting.
It's public information.
That land is also required for schools, colleges, hospitals, and all facilities which this young generation needs. But I don't think, this land will be ever given to us, because I'm privy to it for last 20 years. Defense ministers have tried and failed miserably to get this land, which is actually used for golf courses, for use for their recreation, for their entertainment, not for hospitals and schools and colleges. But why we are going to tribal areas? Because it is easy to go with tanks and, with machine guns and take their land, without their consent, with money also, as you rightly said, man from Tata, that, we can convince them, because easy to convince them. Why don't you convince these defense people?
And the question?
And please bring out a journal, issue of Telka on this, and I take a, debate on the TV
Thank you very
about
much.
defense.
Okay, so the question was, will Tehelka take it into an issue? And I'm sure the answer is yes. I should have said it would be interesting but not compulsory if people said who they are and where they come from, because it adds some light to, for the people who don't know everybody here, to where the questions are coming from. Sohail Seth, who is an advisor to Tata Steel and a great performer on TV.
And I've had the distinction of seeing your expat career bloom in urban India at the cost of the poor. I want to make...
The lesson is never take house.
John, I know you're moderating, but can we have a serious comment for once? I think the issue is not about us versus them, which is most of the time what it's made out to be. You can't have in India...
Could we have a question rather than a speech?
I want to make a comment on which I want Shoma and Mr. Nerurkar to pass a comment.
Briefly, please.
I will try and make it as brief if you'll stop interrupting me. So the question is, you can't have a reliant India if you don't have a policy on energy and on food security. Making land the only issue rather than the process by which either the acquisition or the sustenance of those you displace is organized, unless that happens, you will not have an everlasting solution. And what is being seen, as you rightly said, is people who raise their voices are seen as anti-industry, and anti-industry takes a strident stance, saying that fine, we'll go to a state where it's done. So what is the solution? Let's not be Mamata Banerjee with a problem for every solution. Let's try and work to solutions.
Who are you asking the question from?
I want Shoma and Mr. Nerurkar or Tarun, anyone to comment.
But Sohail, I thought the entire discussion all this while was about process. Everything that you just said, the solutions are better policy management, less panic. I feel that every time the GDP slides by 2%, we don't need to go into a panic. 97% of this country, or 70, I'm not sure what the percentage is, 80% of this country lives and employs itself in the unorganized sector. India is not going to collapse tomorrow just because we've slid our GDP by 2%. It's much better that we hold our breath. It's great, these 20 years, 1991 to now, has increased the wealth in this country by a huge amount. A lot of poor have been pulled out of poverty, but the process was mismanaged. It's a perfect time when this is slowed down with hindsight to put a lot of calm processes into place. Even for industry, I think it is bewildering. If I was an industrialist, I would be terrified of investing, because in the beginning there's bad thought, there's bad policy, and then those decisions are controverted. So really, you invest in big money, decisions are flip-flop. It is very confusing for industry as well. But the point I'm making is that the corporates today have the ears of government much more than the people. So if corporates would get a bit more wise about even investing in business and how business should happen in this country, we would arrive at some solutions instead of only looking at convenience and high but short profitability.
Hemant or Tarun?
Go ahead.
I think the government whom we talk to is also the politicians who are elected by the people. So it's not that we are not talking to the people. But coming back to the main point, I think I agree with Sohail that the solutions the solutions and the process what we have to follow is something which I think by now is reasonably clear. Yes, in the name of speed or something, some mistakes, some hurried decisions have happened. Nobody is denying that. But once we have learnt it, it is not a question that now you have to slow down the industrialization or stop investments or things like this, because our country needs it much more than what we have done even in the last 20 years. If we are hoping to take the people out of poverty, that's a must. Otherwise, why didn't it happen for first 40 years of independence?
Tarun?
I have two quick thoughts responding to Sohail. We have a problem, all right? So we're looking for solutions. I think we must have a national land management development authority to deal with it. Issue of land. Land is issue not going to go away, and it's got to be dealt with publicly, transparently, not in an ad hoc basis, but as a process. absolutely with you, but there must be an institution responsible for this. And second, at the local level, we must have panchayat land banks and panchayat administration and governance at the local level, because they must be consulted and they must be involved in this process.
But how would you get the corruption out of that new agency?
You may not get, let's not think we're going to get corruption out of everything. Let's try and do things right, and the public pressure that comes from the media and the social media is huge today. That itself is a great disincentive, but we have to deal with it. Let's structure things properly.
You have a question down here.
The intent has to be right,
Tarun and Shoma, when we talk about the discourse on rural migration, it is always metrocentric. How many people are coming to Delhi? How many people are going to Bombay? Why aren't we focusing on the migration that happens from the villages to the small towns adjoining? Earlier there used to be towns with a population of 10 to 20,000. Today, the same town, for example, my hometown, it is now bursting at its seams, and it's inhabiting more than 1 lakh people. And the resources which were very scant to begin with, they are totally exhausted, they're non-existent now. So why aren't we focusing on that kind of migration? We are only focusing on, how many people are going to the metros, and they are eating upon the infrastructure of the metros and making it inconvenient for the elite staying there.
I just...
Sorry, please, I was going to ask another
sorry, I was just going to
question.
answer. You're talking about this kind of migration. India has pretty much the biggest development refugees, as they are called. The point is that when you're saying the resources are over, you have to understand that in all these years, in the socialist era, the exchequer could not afford it, and they were anyway grappling with so many other issues. I'm saying these issues are things we can deal with now. But the point is the reason they migrate even to small towns is because their own living conditions are being made inhabitable. It's being made inhabitable. There is absolutely no distributive justice in the way power and water is shared in our country. It's a very unpopular thing, I'm going to say, but it really will, one day, the finite resources of this country and the world will force our consumer patterns to change. In a city, we have 24 hours of water access, particularly in rich areas and elite areas. You go to Paris, it is regulated. There are only certain hours in which you will get water. Here, all the water is taken from rivers and pushed into urban areas where people like us can have a 1-hour bath, coming down in high pressure showers. Same for electricity. Singrauli is the biggest power hub in Asia. There are people there that have been displaced twice for the power projects there, but the communities around Singrauli do not have electricity. 1 meter away from the power hub, which is a gated colony, people outside don't have electricity. There is transmission loss of 40%. I'm just saying this requires calm leadership, and we don't have calm leadership.
Tarun.
No, I think there are many questions, so let's move on.
Let's take 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
Shoma, this here.
one there and then one there. Let's do those 2 together.
Instead of questioning the land that the second largest army and one of the finest armies of the world has, why not question the land at a personal level that Ambanis have, or these top people in CIA have, or for that matter, Robert Vadra has?
I wish we knew.
I think you better deal with that one just as a... No, I think that's for Tarun, wasn't it? Because he's the guy who wants the military... Anyway, go on.
No, I completely agree with you. If you started to have a land map, transparency about a land map, straight away you would know what land is available. So let's look at Ambani's land, but let's look at the land, apart from, again, this becoming accusatory government land, just to make a point, it's first of all about having rational land policy. There's 75 lakh hectares of land in Maharashtra that Ulka Mahajan, who is one of the most fiery land activists, says is perfect for industrial development. But you don't want to do it, because again there is this panic and short-sightedness. You want to build Raigad, or you want to build another town just outside of Bombay. Why? Why can't you spread it out to places where people do want industrial? Strangely, much like Tarun now, when he's not part of CII, I met the industrial development chairman who, after retiring, was telling me that the industrial development policy of India is completely wrong. He said we should only develop where states need that kind of development. We should do agro-industry where states are agriculturally rich. So Rajasthan should have a certain industrial policy, Bengal should have a different industrial policy. But we have everything that is centralized.
Let's take 3 questions. One question there, and then I'm going to take two together here to
If
simplify.
my farmland is acquired to build a school and the principal of that school rejects my son, my child in the interview for nursery, would I be ethically and morally correct in beating up the principal, even if it is illegal?
And two questions here, next door to each other.
I'm wondering where corporate social responsibility figures in this debate. Because, I mean, I don't think participation over land has to be an absolute, either absolutely in the hands of the industry or absolutely in the hands of the farmers. You have several townships that have been developed by the Tatas across the country, right? Why are we focusing so much on policy making centralized in the hands of the state alone? Why can't we look to the industries to also provide the same infrastructure in those places?
And the one here, next door.
Land had been a multi-bagger investment in last decade, and it is famously said in Rajasthan, if the government changes and new chief minister comes in, she will definitely increase the prices of the land and people are investing because of that. So my question is whether this politician come bureaucrat nexus, whether it will allow the right policies to come in.
Neelima.
Talking about the principle you want to beat up, I think that's generally a bad idea. I think you shouldn't do that with principals. I mean, they're very calm, peaceful people, and I also think that it doesn't justify that the person who sells land or whose land is acquired, they have any, that way they should not get a preferential treatment. But of course, there is an issue of settlement and relief. That's what we are talking about, rehabilitation and relief, which should be done by consultation with the people from whom the land is being acquired.
And Hemant, would you like to deal with the corporate social responsibility?
Okay. Look, the corporate social responsibility, as you mentioned, is today in the new LRR bill or the RNN policies of most of the state governments is reasonably in place. And one has to do everything plus over that. That's the bare minimum you must do. And then in terms of employability and education, there is a lot which one needs to do, because in a way you have taken the livelihood of the person, some work, whatever work he was doing has been there. So what does he do for 8 hours or 10 hours a day? So unless you have the appropriate skill development and employability programs, and that's something we can't depend only on the government, the industry has to do it. There is no doubt in our mind about it, and that's the way it has to go. It's a partnership process, it's not A versus B.
John, may I just add to that? I think Mr. Nerurkar is completely right, and Tata's in fact does do a lot of community development, but one of the big problems with corporate social responsibility is that today it's really seen as something separate from the primary practice of business. And I think the problem with business corporate houses is that two things. One, I would say, even before you do CSR, how you do business, how you take from the people is more important than how you give back to the people. Then number two is that when you're doing CSR, most people end up, building a hospital far away or a school far away from which they're again making money, but it is not connected with their primary business. And I think if CSR gets connected and is mandatorily connected, or at least out of the wisdom of your own mind, connected with your primary business, so you're doing environmental remuneration, or you're doing in the immediate neighborhood, you're doing skill development or a whole host of other things, health, then communities will see you as being part of the community. Right now you're only seen as a ravager.
I've been told there can only be one more question, so we're going to do three at the same time. One here.
And a girl here as well, and then...
My question is for Mr. Nerurkar. If we say that the land is of the people and development is for the people, then why isn't the farmer, other than the relief and compensation, why isn't he made a shareholder in the profit-making business? And if at all it is done on paper, is it actually given out in reality?
And then two here.
Okay, sorry.
Briefly, a brief question, please.
Yeah, you talked about the land acquisition bill. So, Ms. Shoma Chaudhury rightly pointed about the eminent domain. I wanted to ask that why has there not been any discussion on problematizing the whole clause on public purpose, because that has resulted in the unfair displacement of a lot of farmers. Secondly, what about the wage laborers who are working on the farms and the tenant farmers, because they are actually the worst sufferers, as was also seen in the case of Nandigram and Shingur. And just one appeal, that when you're talking about land struggle, it is not a recent issue. It's been going on, for a very long time, so don't trivialize it by saying that it's something that has just happened in the last 6-7 years.
And there's one last one here.
It sounds very interesting when people like Mr. Tarun deal out the facts like for the land. I won't comment about the defense land where most of the land is under various ordnance factories. I don't know where they would be re-established if the land is taken from defense, but I would certainly comment about railways. The whole land,
a question please.
The whole land is along the railway lines in the width of 10 to 20 meter system.
A question.
I don't know where the factories come into that and where the industries can be settled on railway land. If you can comment on that, I shall be grateful.
And we didn't pick up the question here on the corporate politician nexus. So let's just go along. Tarun, this is also the last chance.
I think I'll only respond to the last question. I think we need to have a dialogue, we need to have an engagement, and we need to have a discussion on a structured basis on what is the land that the defense people have, what the railways have. Let's look at that. And you may not have large factories, you may have small factories, you may have places where people can be relocated and live there in good urban habitats. Who knows? I think we should open the discussion. We should not take it that 18 lakh acres of land, 1 lakh acres of land is closed for the rest of development of this country.
And of course, a lot of the land will be in sidings and in other depots, which could be redeveloped with the railways underneath. Shoma.
I don't know which of the questions to address. What was your question? It was about the
politics.
The nexus, I mean, one, I agree that it's not that we're ever going to arrive at a society where there's no corruption, no nexus, no greed. That's not possible. It is process-based. It sounds very boring. I think we just have to insist on transparency in every transaction. If it's online, it's not that everybody will be able to access that, but interested parties. And what's wonderful about India is that almost every issue has a very dedicated community of rights activists around it. Unfortunately, they're very often seen as enemies rather than as participants with whom stakeholders should be talking. But I think as we keep insisting on transparency, I'm amazed. I mean, when we first started talking about these issues in Tehelka, we've been writing about it relentlessly for 8-9 years. People were very hostile to us. They saw us as being anti-development, as pro-Maoists, as, everything that is anti-nation. But today I find that the discourse has changed just by the doggedness of rights activists, a few media houses, of continually trying to bring the idea of justice into these discussions. Discourse has changed, and, industry is talking about it now. And I think that's a huge, huge victory,
Yeah, my question was about sharing or issuing the shares, etc. I know on paper it looks very good, but there is an assumption that, especially let's take a heavy investment industry. First 10 years it may not make profit or doesn't make a reasonable profit. So the farmer really doesn't get anything, or the land loser doesn't really get much at that time. Secondly, what shares means, what do you do actually? Suppose his compensation is with a fair compensation, I am not talking of under compensation or maybe little over, because that's what is going to happen now. He will get certain amount. Now, should we invest part of that, let's say as a share capital, so that tomorrow there is upside, I am dead against it? Because he may not get that upside. So he should decide, he has a fair compensation, let the person decide, and that's where education and counseling by everybody comes in. It's not only industry, it's not only government, lots of NGOs also need to do that. Otherwise, the person will not, he is not in a position to take a right investment decision, but he must get his fair share of what he deserves. Then he should be allowed to take a decision what he wants to do with it. We shouldn't force certain shares on him, because he may not get the kind of returns and the dividends what he expects, at least for first 5 to 6 years.
To answer the question of that lady about the tenant farmers, the new bill which the government is proposing to bring includes tenant farmers and agricultural labor as part of the project affected people. So they will be part of the compensation or whatever relief and rehabilitation which is being planned, they will be part of that. But the real question is who's going to regulate it? Who's going to regulate the rehabilitation work which is going to happen? And that's where I think state will continue to play a role. I must also say it's because of activism, it's because of raising these issues in the press that these things are now part of lawmaking. I mean, they have become part of our discussion today because of media. I would also like to add a line about rural aspiration. I think that we haven't talked about it all, and their ambitions. And there is a disconnect. I think I'm not sure whether there is a disconnect, but I think there is a feeling that the people who are looking at options, choices are always urban, or it's not like that. I think a lot of rural people would like to be more urban, more industrialized. They want better schools, they want power in their houses, they want more than a bulb in their home, they would like drinking water, and they see those people who resist giving up land for these kind of projects as part of the problem too.
Well, thank you very much. I guess the answer is that the legacy is with the people, and we hope the government will run it better. Is that the corporates and the government will run it better? I guess everybody will agree with that. Hands up. Anybody disagree with the general principle that it's the legacy is with the people, but the government and the corporates need to do it better? Silence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much to our panellists. Thank you so much. If anyone would like to continue the discussion, some of our authors are very kindly able to go over to the author's signing desk. If you go off this way, that would be wonderful. Thank you again. A round of applause for our wonderful panelists for that discussion.